Welcome back to the Mythic Dungeon International as our upper finals is getting ready between Buff War, Nerf Rogue, and Black Mamba. And as we get ourselves looking at the dungeons for this one, Siege of Boralus has been one that Buff War, Nerf Rogue in particular, Sloot, has been really impressive on. And we're starting to look at how they're matching up against these Western teams rather than looking at how they're shaping up against the Eastern. We're kind of putting them already in a class of their own.
Yeah, I mean, they certainly are. The only team that could really compete with them earlier was Team D, and of course, Battle for Champion, who was not even around this season anymore. So, Buff War and Nerf Rogue is an interesting team. They kind of started as a sort of abracadabra 40k style team, then they worked their way up this past season, and they've been really good on top of it. But, you know, I know Zyra likes to kind of scrutinize their play a bit right now, and it's hard to say, right? What is the team mentality? Do they really care about performing top-notch as they would against the West teams now, or are they okay to just kind of chill out for a bit?
Yeah, because they've definitely earned that BlizzCon spot already. And we saw last week how, you know, Method EU was starting to bring out some other compositions and just be able to have fun with it and not worry too much about where they ended up placing. But also on the side of Buff War Nerf Rogue, it's kind of a pride point for them and that expectation that they should be that top team. They should be performing at a very high level. Let's see how they bring it in as Siege of Boralus gets started.
You know, Siege of Boralus, really kind of interesting that map. And let's just talk about how interesting that map is, Jack, because here, there's really, I mean, yes, you can mess up obviously anywhere in any of these dungeons, but there's really just the biggest chokehold or choke point in the dungeon comes with that Hadal trash, right? And how you deal with the spotter. And some teams have opted to take it real slow and just kind of not even deal with spotters that we saw yesterday. And it's really the teams that kind of go high risk, high reward, like we saw Abra do, Method and A do in the West as well, that it really pays off. That's where you save a huge amount of time.
Yeah, that was the interesting thing is we've seen how teams haven't altered a lot of their strategies for Boralus too terribly heavily. I don't think we've had a bolstering week for Boralus in particular. I don't think we've had a raging either. We haven't had too many affixes that heavily change how you deal with a spotter. So in many cases, they're able to keep very big cores of their strategies and of their routes together. And I'm kind of curious what you think about this, Nagura, because in particular, I remember Method NA had this double spotter strategy they'd work with, and a couple times it just was not working for them. And in that final week, it just started working, and you're able to see kind of all the gears turning. I'm kind of curious what you think if Buff War Nerf Rogue's going to start going for those things in preparation for BlizzCon.
I don't know. It depends on what Sloot said earlier, right?
All right.
It really depends on what the Sloot said earlier about what their mentality is, right? So if they really want to already practice for BlizzCon, then they can try those kind of pulls, those big Method and A pulls that we've seen from them. But they also require a lot of practice, and maybe they just don't want to practice it right now. It's still 1.5 months off, right? So they could just be practicing for those kind of pulls later on and just, you know, relax a little bit and try and see what they can do in this dungeon. But then again, Siege is one of those dungeons that can be difficult if you don't have any sort of practice in it at all. So we'll see what they do.
And I mean, you know, let's take a step back. You know, what is actually the meta of what's going on with these top teams?
I don't know.
I certainly don't think Method EU is practicing day in and day out right now. I think they're enjoying a little bit of time earned off as well. So I don't think any of the teams, as long as they're in BlizzCon, are going too crazy right now.
That's a good point under that one. And let's see how these teams start doing as Siege of Boralus is ready to go for game number 1.
And thank God Zyra's not on the desk anymore, because we have finally an unholy DK coming in on the side of Black Mamba right now. Both teams on that Horde side. Not surprising to see Alliance not a very favorite faction in this dungeon, for the reason that you want to have the Arcane Torrent for the bolstering shout later from the commanders. But let's not jump the gun too much right now, as both teams will get ready with what I suspect to be a pretty substantial pull in front of the first boss. But, you know, Nagura, we talked about bolstering, we talked about bursting and how these can affect this dungeon. But with the size of the pulls that they do, and even the Hadal trash, and even here, explosive can get out of hand real quick.
Oh, most definitely. I just keep thinking about bolstering, because I almost forgot that bolstering can even be a thing in this dungeon. So just when Jack reminded me of bolstering the Siege, I said, I really want to see that, because what are the teams going to do? Are they going to bolster the spotter all the way up and then just, you know, shut him out off the aggro at some point? And because if you bolster the spotter, the artillery damage will be increased, and you can do huge pulls as long as you make sure that you never get hit by any of the spotter abilities, because he's going to do a lot of damage. As Buff War Nerf Rogue has none of that right now, though. We don't have bolstering, so you want to watch out for that Grievous and explosive.
Grievous and Explosive, yeah, Explosive is certainly the one to watch out for, particularly here. I don't think there's too many points in the dungeon, at least as they're handling the Sniper's role, that Grievous will get too out of hand on the players, really just the tank ramp up with Warriors. But Black Mamba here started over on Sergeant Bainbridge, first boss of the dungeon for the Horde side, and they've committed their Bloodlust to it. They're only at 8% trash versus Buff's 11% trash, who's also committed their Bloodlust to actually trash. They haven't even pulled the boss. The boss waits them in the back. We could see them there. So they're dedicating some more to trash and rather letting the boss's debuff and damage taken from the bombs on the encounter carry them rather than the Bloodlust.
Yeah, we see, I mean, Black Mamba is an 8% trash, so they definitely dealt with quite a bit less compared to Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue. But Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue doing definitely smaller pulls compared to the West. And if you want to compare them to the West, then you just want to keep looking at that. So what we've seen from the highest teams in the West region was that they were pulling all of the 2 trash packs that are inside this boss area on top of the trash pack that is standing outside. You had the 2 rogues run in, tricks it on top of the tank, and then just pull it all together. So it's like 3.5 trash packs that the West pulls with Bloodlust. But Buff Warrior Rogue, doing the same trash percentage, they get to up to 21, but they do it in 2 pulls and also committing that Bloodlust. So definitely going a little bit slower compared to the West. But for Black Mamba here, it's going to work out for them as they have the extra trash percentage. Wong actually almost going down there with this stun.
Yeah, that's what I was watching there. You got clipped by one of the heavy slashes from these Vanguards right now, and if you get hit by that, I mean, you're stunned for 4 seconds, huge amount of damage. You got cut double, but the Resto Druid going down here on the side of Black Mamba. Fortunately, they have the DK, but they won't need it. Actually, they use the battle res anyway. That was a bit of a...
They have no other res, right?
True, but yeah, I guess. But I mean, they just killed the boss, and they're probably not going to do a very substantial trash pull. The Druid could have just stealthed back through, so hopefully that won't be a trouble for them, because now they don't have a battle res for about 6.5 minutes, and there are some pretty nasty trash coming up. Nonetheless, battle res is gone for Black Mamba as they get started on the next pack, consisting of those Marauders that debuff the tank. Moon going down really low, no cheat death proc there as they try to struggle through the rest of this. Bolstering Shout coming up. We're going to see an Arcane Torrent being put out here by Black Mamba to get rid of that buff, essentially, that goes on the surrounding mobs, giving them a 70% damage reduction buff. Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue, on the other hand, is now about to down the first boss. Goes down, and indeed they'll be started as well. So there's already about a 9% trash difference between the two.
Yeah, Marito unfortunately getting hit by one of those slashes as well by the frontal cast from the Vanguard, dropping very low. Did not go down though, so good on them as they did manage to recover. Ching dropping very low at the start of this pull as well, as all of those curses got applied to him, but immediately got dispelled by Loda, by the Resto Druid. As they're dealing with this pack with the Commander as well. This Commander, the patrol, is sometimes being skipped by some of the teams, but Buff Warrior Rogue choosing to do it. So they actually are going to get quite a bit of trash percentage, more than Black Mamba. So I'm wondering if Black Mamba is going to try to do the double spotter strategy where they have all of this trash being pulled there, because they're definitely sipping quite a bit more than Buff Warrior Rogue does here.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, they're only 5% now. Well, there will be still at 9% once Buff Warrior finishes this group, but immediately straight to the first spotter on the side of Black Mamba right now. We see Wong jump in, Heroic Leap in, and they don't do a tactic that we saw in the West where they let the tank go in by themselves first in order to grab and control the first round of artillery strike from the spotter, allowing them to take all the damage from the snipers until they kill the sniper. So bit more damage on the group, nothing too dangerous right now, even in this fortified environment, as Black Mamba moves the artillery strike around the next pack of 4 mobs, leading up, of course, to all the cutthroats on the side there. Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue has dealt with that. Same Heroic Leap coming in from Ching BB as he grabs aggro on the spotter and on the powder shots here.
And we see Black Mamba, of course, dealing with all the footmen and the gutters here as well. Now, one thing that is different for the Horde side compared to the Alliance side in Siege of Boralus is that the Horde side actually gets those footmen and the gutters, which are just fighting each other. And once you attack them, the gutters will just die off. They will just die immediately. They're very low HP, and you gain the percentage on top of it. So you definitely want to make sure that you hit them with any sort of ability before they die to the artillery from the spotter, though, to be able to get this extra percentage. While the Alliance side does not have those mobs in the dungeon, Siege being the only dungeon in BFA that is actually different depending on what faction you're playing.
I mean, it's all about that faction war, and Horde come out on top in this dungeon for sure. Explosives going off here, a couple of them for Buff Warrior, and I've noticed on their side that Ching BB is actually on a lot of that explosive duty. Even on the boss, he was just holding the ads off to the side and dealing with all the explosives that come up, so no support, unfortunately, from the blade flurrying rogues, not yet at least, until they get some heavier pulls later in the dungeon. Black Mamba has already stealthed and skipped all the way through to the second boss, boss and done the same aggressive pull that we see coming in the west with the spotter that's going to rain down a parade of artillery strikes on top of this, like getting one of the frontals, unfortunately, to make down to 8%. No cheat death proc there as Dread Captain Lockwood hits 90% for them, and she'll be soon off for her first transition phase.
Yeah, so Black Mamba actually doing quite a good job so far. I mean, we've been talking about them actually pulling off those MDI strats, and they have the strategies, they have the ideas, but then they don't execute them properly. And again, their DK is going down. They don't have a battle rest because they rested to it before, which was very unnecessary, as we mentioned, because the boss was down. They could have just released. And now this battle rest would have been so needed as they're in boss combat. They already engaged Red Captain Lockwood, so there's no way of him releasing, coming back. So they either have to reset the boss, or they have to just go through this fight with only 2 damage dealers. But that is going to cost them so much time because of the way the boss works with the intermission phases.
Who would have think you would have needed a battle res here? Certainly not me, says this caster. 37% trash on the board. I think they've cleaned up most of the trash around Dread Captain Lockwood as Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue prepares to the same pull. They're already at 56% trash, which frankly is going to allow them later on to skip a lot more of that village or town area trash leading up to the quad sniper, and then of course to the Hadal Alley or the Hadali. A lot of damage coming in on Ching early on as Dread Captain Lockwood drops to 89%, 88% versus the 92 over on Black Mamba. Now, the reason I mentioned this, that's relevant, obviously, just kind of splitting hairs right now, but the big deal is you want to aim to skip one of the transition phases of Dread Captain Lockwood. It is a huge time save and time sink, something that obviously Black Mamba is not going to be able to do at this point, but Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue has the opportunity to.
Yeah, they might even get 2 more transitions, to be honest, for Black Mamba, with going through this boss fight with 1 less damage dealers for the whole time. And you can see the cooldown on Battle Rest is probably not going to come up for this whole fight for them. So huge time loss for Black Mamba. And not only that, they also an insane amount of trash behind. Now, theoretically in Siege, trash does not even mean as much until you get to the spotter area, just because the amount of time it took Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue to do this trash percentage that they are had compared to Black Mamba, it might not even take Black Mamba as much with the double spotters later on. So in theory, it doesn't mean as much, but we will see what Black Mamba does later on. And Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue, I mean, they have 61%. That's quite a lot. I don't think the West has so much percentage before they go to the spotter area. So it really seems like they're not trying to do some of those huge pulls that we've seen.
Yeah, certainly. And I mean, Explosive is a pretty limiting affix. If you pull too many mobs and you just have a bad luck of 6 orbs spawning at the same time, you have to dedicate to them, or obviously if you don't, they explode, they could kill you, and then you're just wasting so much time DPSing those. You're running out of cooldowns. The big trash pack's just going to kill you. It's not sustainable for everyone. So a little damage and danger here on the side of Black Mamba as BL Wong commits his shield while it's trying to stay alive, like dipping down sub 10% as well. Finally getting stabilized here by the Resto Druid right now as they look to finish off the next transition coming up. Dread Captain Lockwood still at 41% for them versus Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue, who's now starting at 30%, and this is pretty much the home stretch that they're going to try to beat Dread Captain Lockwood's transition on. So you could take a look at the energy bar below her percent. As soon as she hits 100 energy, doesn't even matter if she's at 1 health, she will jump up and freeze the face.
Yeah, well, it looks like they're going to have enough damage, just barely. It's going to be very close for them as it drops to 6%, 5%. And Loda doing a lot of damage as well, as you can see him being just in cat form, just doing as much damage as possible. And there we go. They did manage to beat this damage check. They also are going to have their Battle Res be back up very soon. But unfortunately, disaster for Black Mamba as their healer goes down. It might just be a full team wipe. Captain Lockwood still on 41%.
It'll absolutely be a full team wipe. That warrior cannot sustain through those 4 stacks of Grievous. Try as he might with Urchin equipped, it's going to finish him off eventually, and there's nothing he can do about it. Moon's gone down as well. Alike's gone down. Moon will be going down. Doesn't have cheat death, and full team wipe at 40% after dedicating all that time to that tyrannical boss with a 4-man group is completely wasted at this point. So they're going to have to release and come back at 38% trash, 5 deaths on the board versus Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue sitting at 63%. Already dealt with the boss, and now they're just trying to finish off one of these demolishers on the side as they move forward. And Nagura, it's not Loda. He's now evolved to Loyoda, all right?
I'm sorry. Okay, Loyoda doing a good job healing his group up as they're fighting these demolishers, which are not being damaged by the artillery from the spotter. So definitely want to make sure they keep that in mind and single target down the demolisher, as the rest of the mobs are going to be dealt with the spotter. But I'm not completely sure if they even have a spotter around here for Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue, as I didn't see an artillery being cast yet. They're actually on their way to the first Void Emissary, and it really looks like they haven't been dragging this this spotter until the... Oh my god, did you see that beautiful bull rush? That was beautiful. I hope Hadal saw that and he's going to clip it for us later on.
No bull about that. That was an excellent play there from Loyota, hopping in his Loyota Camry and just zooming through all of the mobs there. And of course, that does knock them down for 2 seconds. So good to interrupt, because there are some casters in there that are quite dangerous. You know, I'm not really the most ecstatic person to see them playing this Void Emissary. I think every other group skips it and just deals with all the trash at the top. And because they got so much trash on at the beginning of the dungeon, I don't think it was even on their menu in the first place to deal with any spotter. Maybe they'll use this spotter for the Hadal trash here, but certainly nothing through the town. So I guess that's kind of how they circumvented that issue. Good placement here from the spotter artillery right now, as all of them are CC'd or crowd controlled right within those circles. Now, these snipers particularly dangerous, not just because of the fact that they shoot random members of your team, but they have an ability called Ricochet, which just deals huge splash damage on everybody. And multiply that by 4 and Fortified, you're gonna have some dead DPS members on the team. Usually just the DPS, let's be honest here in Nagura. Black Mamba added again on Dread Captain Lockwood at about 90%, so they have to restart the entire fight as Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue. Slower than we'd like to see, but steady at 80% and getting ready for the Hadal trash.
Yeah, Black Mamba, they actually popping their Bloodlust now here in Captain Lockwood to be able to catch up. But again, yeah, Black Mamba, just it looked like they were in the lead even, or it looked like it was very close between those two teams as they were fighting Lockwood, and then just, you know, again, failing to execute their strategies properly, having so many problems with mechanics, their DK going down, no rest available. Yeah, just probably need to fix in the future for sure. As Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue moving on, they are definitely not playing the fastest strategy that we have seen from the teams. We've definitely seen some riskier strats with the double spotters, making sure they pull all of the Hadal room, but none of that happening for Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue. And they also don't have to. They're so far ahead at this point. They're in 86% trash. They only have the room left to deal with, and then they have the 2 bosses. They even have Bloodlust available as well, and 1 battle rest for any sort of problems that might be happening. And for the whole dungeon, they only had 1 death. A really clean run by Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue. Even if it wasn't the fastest, it was definitely clean.
Yeah, and that's what I was going to say. You know, they are certainly moving a bit more carefully than we're used to seeing, but does that really matter at this point? I mean, they're 1 death, 89%. Here comes the rest of the trash as they pull Hadal out of the room, which of course will automatically aggro everything else. Spotter is CC'd, entangling rooted, if you will, on the side. A lot of damage coming in. And speaking of damage and disaster, Black Mamba here having another strenuous disaster.
Yeah.
They had a battle res available. Both Like and the Unholy DK went down. They used the battle res on Like and nothing for the Unholy DK. So now they have to finish the rest of this boss off again with a 4-man group, and hopefully they manage to do it, because there's a mess of mobs in there right now, and explosives are just being chiseled down by the rest of the group as Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue is about to finish off the remaining 100% of their trash, controlling explosives well, and they only have to kill these 2 commanders here, which of course are not affected by the artillery strike from the spotters.
Yeah, Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue, they're just finishing off those commanders, and again, they're gonna reach 100% exactly, so they're gonna be fine on trash. They have the Bloodlust. They can use it on this boss or on the last boss for the tentacles. Either way works, to be honest. It is a fortified setting, so Darkfathom does not have as much HP as we've seen on the tyrannical environment, so they should be fine to just save it for the last platform for safety reasons, to be honest, because Hadal, not one of the most dangerous bosses really. You do have this huge AoE coming in that we just saw, but outside of that, not really that many things that can happen here, so you probably just want to save it for the last boss to be able to meet the damage checks on those gripping tentacles, to be able to not get those demolishing.
Here comes the first wave here from Hadal. Now, it is pure magic damage. It's why you saw Supreme sit out there with his Cloak of Shadows, just trying to min-max his damage on the boss and not have to move and hide behind the wall, behind the statue, losing a lot of that damage. Black Mamba here looks like they'll be able to finish off the boss. I'm actually not entirely sure right now, as another wave of spotter artillery strike goes down, displacing their Resto Druid. Constant explosives being intended to by the group, and I think they'll be able to kill it off in this round before the next transition finally for them. So 8 deaths on the board. Had to essentially 4-man the boss 1.5 times over, because they had that first wipe earlier, as Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue sitting here pretty at 35% in just a moment on Hadal, and then they'll soon be off to Vikoth, the final boss.
Yeah, so we'll see what Black Mamba has in stock here for this area. I do believe they have the spotter rooted in the back, so they definitely want to do some double spotter strats, which is something we've seen from the west. You can see the artillery strike there being on the DK, so definitely want to make use of this. This is decently dangerous, because there's so many things that can go wrong. If you get hit by any of those bananas, you get stunned, and then you will get hit by the artillery strike. On top of that, you just have frontal cast that needs to be avoided. And there's also Emissary of Tides and Enchanted Emissaries and Void Emissaries that you need to deal with. So definitely not easy to pull off this double spotter strategies, especially since those teams are also playing hordes. So there's no way for the healer to go out of combat with a Shadow Melt or something and heal and drink up. So they definitely want to make sure that they manage their mana properly if they decide to drag the spotter throughout this dungeon.
Darkfathom turns into Dead Fathom as the rest of their group gets ready to head down the hill towards Vikoth. And of course, they do have the battle, they're not the battle res as well, but they have the Bloodlust available for that final phase, so they can focus only on the Gripping Terror and ignore the high health Demolishing Terror. A lot of damage coming in on Wong right now with a pretty substantial pull here for Black Mamba on their side. He's down to 3% and gets finished off. And once again, I mean, they just always bite off more than they can chew. They keep going for these long-range 3-balls and getting nothing but air for the side of Black Mamba. 12 deaths on the board now as Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue has started their first phase here. Debuff here on Ching, quite a bit of damage too as he starts ramping up that Grievous and gets the support Dispel from Loyoda, who actually procced his staff early on.
Yeah, he procced his staff. I believe it was intentional for damage here on the Gripping Tentacle as they were trying to meet the timer here where they only get 2 Demolishing Terrors instead of the 3. Now, 2 are manageable. One is being tanked by the tank and one can be off-tanked by the rogues with Riposte, with the parry and cloak as well. So definitely manageable to have 2 of them up. But as soon as you get 3 Demolishing Terrors, then you're going to be in trouble unless they spawn close to each other so the tank can take 2. But definitely going to cause a lot of issues. So they don't want to have 3 of those as they are moving on to the second platform. I very highly doubt that they will use a Bloodlust here. Usually teams save it for the last platform and they just deal with the Demolishing on this one.
Yeah, they actually destroy this Demolishing, and that's usually what happens is the entire group kind of focuses that first Demolishing on the second platform so that everybody has as much time as possible to just focus on the Gripping here, and that's exactly what the team's doing. You can see even Ching is committed to it because he knows that the next Demolishing will not spawn at least too quickly. You have about 20 seconds until the next one, so they're trying to get as much damage in and perhaps even have only a 2 tentacle phase on this platform, which should be quite a nice feat. Unholy DK going down yet again on Black Mamba's side here as they try to finish off the rest of the trash in the town square right now. Demolisher running rampant and Unholy DK running back. He gets targeted with the artillery. Actually, the rogue gets targeted with the artillery on the way in, so it's completely wasted for the rest of the mobs as Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue is about to move through their second platform here. Cannon gets repaired by the Kultiran, and off they go to the third and final platform.
Tomboy actually dropping very low, did not proc his cheat up though, so it's still going to be fine for the rest of this fight as they're shooting the cannon on the boss to get the last platform enabled. Now, usually, especially with Bloodlust, you're not gonna kill the Demolishing Terror on this last platform, as it also has more HP than all the other ones. Tomboy dropping low again, having this debuff. Now, this magic debuff gets applied to 2 members of the group. It will do ticking damage, so it does quite a bit of damage actually, and it will get applied at the same time. So the healer can only dispel 1 because of the cooldown on Dispel. So that's why Tomboy was dropping so low there. But now we see the Bloodlust being popped, and you see them in the back there focusing the Gripping Terror while the tank is off tanking the Demolishing in the meantime.
Yeah, and you know they're gonna have to have a bit of luck here because there is another Demolishing that spawns. That's just what I want to say. So it is in the back, fortunately for them, but it doesn't really matter because that Gripping Terror is killed. So you just want to have somebody in melee range of that Demolishing to make sure that it doesn't hull crack the rest of the team. Down goes Vikoth, and up goes Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue with the first game 1-0 in the series.
Right, Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue only a couple seconds behind their time trial time as they take game number 1 on Siege of Boralus. And again, this is just them playing their own strategies onto that one. They didn't really take a lot of risks. You weren't seeing Loyoda, for example, running into melee every second that he had to add more damage. And overall, they have a good strategy they're able to execute on, and they don't really need to do much fancy stuff there, Tettles.
Yeah, I thought it was kind of interesting how they pulled that commander pack before Dread Captain Lockwood. I feel like we've seen most teams looking to skip it because those mobs actually have a significant amount of health, and you can get some more of your count facilitated by a spotter later on in the dungeon. But overall, this was a pretty flawless run from Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue. They ended up phasing Dread Captain Lockwood faster than most other teams that we end up seeing. towards the beginning of the instance, though, it was pretty close between both Black Mamba and Buff War Nerf Rogue. Black Mamba elected to pull Dread Captain Lockwood with 31% count, where Buff War Nerf Rogue elected to pull Lockwood with 56% count, so that kind of shows like the differentiation between it all. Buff War Nerf Rogue also does a very interesting strategy here, where they use 2 saps and 2 blinds in order to be able to use the spotter to drop the artillery on top of the snipers, creating an incredibly safe pull. And overall, just the use of the spotter and making sure that everybody is in position to be able to get those artillery strikes on top of all of the mobs, making sure that the Emissary of the Tides isn't absorbing a full like set of artillery strikes, because if the Tides is in the pack, then the Tides will eat the artillery strike before any other mob does. So just the utilization of that, making sure that all the mobs are CC'd, the pulls were really clean from Buff War Nerf Rogue, so this is pretty good from them.
That's right, and we've seen previously how, you mentioned the double sap, double blind pull. They've taken it easy a couple times, and we've seen other teams do some similar things as well. Salute bringing the Vengeance Demon Hunter ahead as well, just to be able to shut down all the mobs, make sure they got all the shots in very cleanly. So at this point, it definitely seemed like they're kind of just taking a foot off the gas. They're not pushing themselves into the most difficult strategies possible for BlizzCon. They know that they can win if they just execute on their own routes.
Yeah, and that's just right. And, the thing with the snipers and not touching them while the CC is up, I mean, it's hugely dangerous to break the CC on those snipers. The ricochet is going out at the wrong time on the rogues, and it causes everyone to spread and scramble, and then you're going to miss some artillery strikes. It gets out of hand really quickly. So it's nice to see the calm and collected version of Buff War Nerf Rogue. I'm not even sure if they would do anything much differently in their version of the dungeon, because, I mean, taking it easy is one thing to say, hey, in this pack we usually pull 3, let's pull 1 and 2, something like that. But when you have such a big strategy swap from not using the spotter at all through the entire town, where you see the West teams use it through the entire town, that's not something that you just turn on and off. I just don't think that's part of their strategy in this dungeon at all.
I think the only way that you actually get Siege of Boralus quicker from Buff War Nerf Rogue is them not doing that commander pack before Lockwood, and instead getting some of their count with the monkeys with the spotter, maybe doing some like double spotter strategy too. That feels like the only way that they could actually facilitate like a faster run. But beyond that, this was a pretty good run from them.